Some superhero games have legendary reputations, like the Batman Arkham games that we've talked about so many times on this channel, but many games in the superhero genre have been overlooked. Even some games that were enjoyed at release just aren't talked about anymore at all. And as someone who loves diving into all kinds of topics with you, I thought it would be fun to run through my picks for 5 underrated superhero games that deserve way more attention today. Before we hop into the list, I do have a question of the day for you real quick, which is, what do you think is just an underrated superhero game? Like, what do you think deserves more attention, more praise, and why? Why do you like it so much? Let me know. I'm always excited to hear your answers to these.
Number 5.
Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro is a very interesting game. Now, the original Spider-Man PlayStation 1 game was developed primarily by Neversoft, though there were versions as well for Windows and other platforms developed by groups like Treyarch and even Grey Matter. Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro was actually developed primarily by Vicarious Visions, using the engine and core systems of the original game. But they actually built new levels and added new mechanics and an entirely new story, making this a sequel to the original game from Neversoft, but made by Vicarious Visions, in that same continuity. Now, if you haven't played it, think of it like how WB Games Montreal used a lot of the framework Rocksteady did for Batman Arkham City in order to create Arkham Origins. And if you've played those games, you probably already know where this goes next. Because of that difference in development teams, there are big differences between the two games, but they also feel very tied together. Now, many players note that the sequel lacks some of the comic book charm that the original game had, but others point out the positives that this game went for that the original didn't. And essentially, this led to a constant comparison game between the original Spider-Man for PlayStation 1 and Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, with each of these having different strengths, but most agreeing that the level design, the secrets, and the charm of the original title were more impressive than the sequel. And unfortunately, this basically made this game feel a little bit like a game expansion. Now, this led to the game being very underrated because it was just seen as a lesser version of the original title, with its strengths like its story, interesting new costumes, etc. All of those merits, they end up being overlooked because of it. Now, personally, I believe there's a lot of underrated elements to Spider-Man 2. The team at Vicarious Visions was able to improve the graphical fidelity of the game, with Spider-Man's model being more detailed, similar to how it was on PC for the original game. Now, personally, I preferred the original model, but it's also admittedly because I grew up more with that first game. I have a ton of nostalgia for that art style and the vibes of what they were going for. Enter Electro also went out of the way to include different villains instead of just reusing those from the first game, and it did expand some of the webbing systems in order to include more types of webs and some different movement for Spider-Man. And this game also had an impressive selection of costumes for Spider-Man. I'm genuinely surprised to this day that they went so far in on creating these textures and different costumes just in order to have unlockable, fun little side things that tied back into the comics, with these different costumes having different abilities, and there even being a create a spider, like create a suit type little mode where you could mix and match the various abilities that you unlocked from the suits with different suits, allowing you to actually customize your version of Spider-Man that you wanted to play on subsequent playthroughs. One thing that's interesting about this game to me ties into media preservation, and that's that the original final level actually took place on the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center in New York City. But after 9/11, Activision had to quickly pull and change the ending before release. So to this day, there are still some weird, expensive prototype discs or early development builds and copies of this game that'll pop up with the Twin Towers boss fight at the end. It makes it sound like you're fighting the Twin Towers, but you're fighting Electro, obviously, at the Twin Towers. And some of those end up even being backed up online. So there's actually a lot of prototype builds and different things for this game still preserved online through emulation. It's a very interesting change caused directly by a historical event, and this also gives that game a bit of a mysterious factor, because the version that most of us ended up playing was not the original intended vision for the game. This game also, like its predecessor, was heavily inspired as well by some of the vibes of 90s Spider-Man comics and cartoons, and the next game on the list is similar in that way.
Number 4. It's the fourth one.
4.
The Adventures of Batman and Robin, directly inspired by the DC animated universe, and more specifically, Batman the Animated Series. Now, this game draws heavily from the aesthetics and source material of Batman the Animated Series, specifically in the era of the series that featured both Batman and Dick Grayson's Robin in a more prominent role. So we're talking, way before things like Batman The New Adventures, but after the first slew of episodes that had come out early on. It's kind of in that middle era where BTAS Classic was starting to reach its close. And if you've followed this channel before, you probably know the DCAU is my favorite on-screen version of the DC Comics characters. From Static all the way to Batman himself, I love this universe. And it was presented by so many creators, but two of them that were just instrumental, always being credited, were Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. One interesting thing about this game is that it's from a time in gaming where different studios would make entirely different video games with the same name and general premise or theme, depending on the platform and its hardware specifications. So because of this, the Genesis version of this game is basically a shooter that involves batarangs and projectiles, but the Super Nintendo version is more of a beat-em-up that still utilizes gadgets. So for me, in many ways, it's really hard to pick which version of this game is better or that I like more. The Sega Genesis version, which was also the Mega Drive throughout the world, it basically kicks my ass with its difficulty. I am not good at it. I don't even know how someone would beat that game on single player. The Genesis does have beautiful visuals, and it has a spectacle that holds up to this day in terms of this game, but going more in on projectiles over hand-to-hand combat, it felt a little odd at times for Batman since he's known for martial arts and problem-solving abilities, which I think the SNES version goes into a little more with a mixture. But the Genesis version is actually considered one of the most technically impressive games on that system. Sega's version also allowed you to play as both Batman or Robin, or both in two-player, but the SNES version only has single-player mode with the playable character being Batman. So that might sound like, oh, the SNES version is just notably worse, but it really isn't, because it's also more of a classic beat-em-up, and you do get some choices of what different gadgets you want to bring with you into the field, even with the ability to retreat to the Batcave, change your loadout, and come back with a different Batman loadout of gadgets. That kind of thing is really neat. Like, that's unique from the Genesis version. So honestly, if I had to pick, I'd probably go with the SNES version, just because it does have the best of both worlds for gameplay and vibes, but it lacks a lot of that spectacle of the Genesis version, and it also does lack native two-player, and that's really unfortunate because it's Batman and Robin, with the SNES version only featuring Robin in cutscenes. So again, pick your poison. I like them both. But the next game we're going to talk about is honestly way more brutal than anything Batman was up to during this era.
Number 3.
X-Men Origins Wolverine, the Uncaged Edition, is an interesting situation. It's actually kind of funny because most movie tie-in games are considered inferior to their film counterparts, and there are a few that are on par or better, but most of them throughout history have just been considered lazy cash grabs. This game is the exact opposite of that. Even though it is now considered a cult classic superhero game, and there are some people who will talk about it and hype it up, there were a ton of people who just overlooked or ignored this game or continue to do so due to it sharing the same title as the movie, which is really unfortunate. And there were also a ton of people who played the non-Uncaged edition of this game on the previous generation of consoles like the PS2, who didn't get to appreciate things that the game had to offer on the PS3 and Xbox 360 era. Now personally, I'm one of the people who really enjoyed most of the Fox X-Men films, but I'd be lying if I argued the movies didn't have major problems, from sometimes being embarrassed of comic book source material and flashy outfits, all the way down to, of course as well, ratings restrictions, especially for Wolverine. And while this would be solved in a couple instances later on, like the Wolverine movie's unrated cut pushing that boundary away from PG-13, and Logan the movie being R-rated, and of course Deadpool as well, it is ironic that X-Men Origins Wolverine, the game, didn't have the same restrictions that the movie had, at least for the uncaged edition. Now, the prior edition for this game on PS2, Wii, etc., that was pretty censored. The combat system is not as deep, and that's why that game is not on this list today. But the uncaged edition is bloody and it's brutal, and it has this amazing healing feature for Wolverine where his flesh will actually take damage down to his skeleton and then regenerate over time from his healing factor. I don't know how impressive it'll be to people today who had never seen this at its peak, but to me it's still impressive, and especially at the time, this was a really cool, innovative, and unique idea for a character like Wolverine taking damage and healing from these bullet wounds, stabs, etc. It really did make you feel like you were playing as Weapon X. One kind of infamous thing with this game is that it actually leaked online before its release, and even then people were saying it was better than the movie in terms of its script and vibes and the things that were going on with it. And it's interesting to me that gameplay here, you could probably look at it on a surface level and it could be misconstrued as just another hack and slash game, but it is actually surprisingly deep. There's environmental kills, there's specific abilities that add to combos, and the game explores the more feral aspects of Wolverine as a character. The story's a more fleshed out version of what the movie was going for, with side characters being tied into the plot more thoroughly, and a deeper exploration of the Weapon X program, with even more comic book source material being referenced. You know what else is awesome about this game? They even got Hugh Jackman himself, the hugest Ackman of all time, to voice Wolverine. He reprised the iconic role that he had played throughout the years in live action, and this allowed Hugh to tap into different sides of Logan because this script was so different. Now, in the film, Wolverine's fairly conflicted. I mean, I'd say there are some animal-like tendencies or scenes in Origins Wolverine, but it probably as a film did the worst with that aspect of the character. It's kind of ironic that even in something like X2, he was more feral and more animal-like than he was right after coming out of the Weapon X program in this movie. And this could be because of multiple script rewrites, studio interference, chasing a PG-13 rating, any variety of things that did happen to this movie, I'm sure affected that, but it's not the case in the game. In the game, Logan is allowed to be animalistic, he's allowed to be brutal, and struggle with this almost nature versus nurture and the trauma that he went through before and during the Weapon X program. So in many ways, this game allowed Hugh Jackman to essentially play a variant Wolverine long before the films would start tapping into that idea, which made the game an extremely unique representation of Jackman's Wolverine. But that's not the only game on this list where the movie was something that kind of dragged down a superhero game that otherwise was pretty fun.
Number two, the numero dos.
Next up, we have Green Lantern Rise of the Manhunters, and this game is pretty much the only major Green Lantern video game out there. I know what you're already typing, I know. There are games where you can play as the Lanterns, but the versions of Rise of the Manhunters are the only Green Lantern titled games, that are actually named after and focus on Green Lantern himself and that Lantern Corps. We're not talking Injustice, we're not talking Lego Batman, we are talking just a straight up Green Lantern game. This is about all that's out there, so the fact that it is underrated is a good thing, because if you like Green Lantern, you don't got a lot of options. Now, this game is what many would call a God of War clone, and in fact, there's a lot of clones in terms of superhero games from that era, where they do get discounted for being too similar to another game. But what's fun about this game is that it does some of the things that God of War did well, also really good. Like, for example, it does have hack and slash brawling gameplay, and it does feature quick time events and combo building, but it was ignored by so many people because it was tied to the 2011 Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie, so a lot of people didn't get to experience the fun that this game had to offer. Now, while I think that that movie is actually a kind of fun movie, I'm not saying it's a great movie, it's not like it has a perfect script, but I do think it's a fun, sit down, have a silly time film. It did become a joke to a lot of fans who ripped into the insane amount of CGI and the writing at the time, which led to the game being overlooked by many because, like a few entries on this list, the genre of movie tie-in games had gotten a bad reputation overall. Plus, the reputation of the movie itself compounded onto that to hinder interest in this game. Speaking of writing, one thing that's actually really fascinating about this game is that it also features an original story that was worked on by Marv Wolfman, who had worked on DC Comics for many years with titles including Teen Titans and even the monumental DC crossover Crisis on Infinite Earths. We're not talking the CW one, we're talking about the actual huge comic book event that led to killing off multiple characters and trying to simplify the DC multiverse. It's that Marv Wolfman who worked on this game. While I know nowadays he'd rather distance himself from this movie or make jokes at its expense, Ryan Reynolds did return to voice Hal Jordan in this game, which I'm a bit of a sucker for that kind of thing, I'll admit. It really does take me back to the days of the weird licensed movie games like the Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man games that fell in this category, where you get the voice of the film to come in and they added their spin to what was going on. I will say a lot of times their hearts weren't in it, and you could tell, but as a kid it was so cool to hear the same voice from the movie and feel like you were participating in that same world, in that same version of that comic book character. It's also worth noting that there is a version of this game on the Nintendo Wii as well, and that version actually visually resembles, at the time, what was the upcoming Green Lantern animated series in terms of its aesthetics and design. But that's not the one I'm talking about, because that's pretty much an entirely different game and I've never played it. So I don't want to comment on that game. What I know is that when I sit down to play Green Lantern Rise of the Manhunters, it is a fun time, and it's not a game anybody really ever talks about, which is sad. But there's one other game on our list like that as well, that is a bit of a clone in some ways, but pretty unique in others.
Number 1!
Splat.
The final game is Captain America Super Soldier. This is a game I liked so much that I did go on to platinum it on the PlayStation 3, and it is odd, but in some of the best ways possible. Now, this game was worked on by Next Level Games, which is a Canadian studio you might know from their work on things like Luigi's Mansion 2 and 3. But sadly, this game was overlooked by many because, again, it came out in that era that saw the decline of interest in video games based on movie tie-ins. They had gained that bad reputation, which then hurt Captain America before it even hit store shelves because people assumed this type of game was just bad on its own by default. This game gets called a clone again, but this time of the Batman Arkham series. But that's actually a really good thing because the combat of this game was directly inspired by Arkham and it feels a lot like it. So if you like Arkham combat, imagine that with Captain America. The devs managed to take Cap's shield and incorporate it into this combat system with ricochets, throws, and blocking, which made it feel unique from the Arkham titles as well. So the shield, it's not just a weapon. It's basically the entire combat system being based off of this shield and tied into that shield. You're throwing the shield, you're bouncing it off of walls or enemies, or you're using it to essentially open up paths, and you're using it to block during combat, which I think is really, really unique. While I continue my tradition of butchering people's names, this was also written by comic book writer Christos Gage, who worked on multiple titles and characters over the years, including Spider-Man. A lot of the movie tie-in games don't know where to take the source material or how to expand it, and development teams get caught up and lost in translation from a film medium to the game one. That said, I think Captain America is an exception of that. There's a great deal of effort used to incorporate comic book source material that wasn't even in the original movie into the game, focusing on Captain America's time in World War II, infiltrating a Hydra base, and involving villains like Zemo and Zola. Now, obviously, this game does also kind of fit in its own little splintered timeline of the MCU because, you know, it doesn't neatly fit into the MCU at all. It was made during a time when there was no Avengers movie or Captain America sequels, and characters like Zemo would be adapted later on in the MCU films. But it is interesting and creative that they wanted to take a unique spin on Captain America lore. So if you're a fan of the movie, you could go watch the movie and play this game, and they do actually work as companion pieces. Would it be canon to later entries? No, it's not like you could play this game and it ties into Age of Ultron, but it's still really cool. Also, because there aren't exactly a ton of World War II superhero games, this game's able to straddle a line between superhero game and war game, which I think adds to the experience and separates it from other comic-based games. Like so many games on this list, there are other versions of this game too, but I didn't play those ones. I played the PlayStation 3 version of the game, so maybe in the future we'll come back and look at the other versions. Maybe they're totally different, but what I do know is that 360 and PlayStation 3 version of the game, it's just so much fun, and it really does deserve more recognition nowadays. So these are 5 of those superhero games that I think are extremely underrated or that people don't really talk about anymore for the most part. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Are there any games that you think are underrated? Are there superhero games you think are overrated? Anything like that. I'm always interested to hear that down below. If you enjoyed today's video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, let me know what you think. I appreciate that. And if you enjoy this kind of content, we do have members content on this channel as well, which is exclusive content. And we do have our own other channel, Degenerate Plays, where it's a podcast style channel where we've actually played through a lot of different superhero games, talking, hanging out with you guys, having a good time. That will be in the description down below. Also as well, I do want to point your attention to our store, cosmobunny.shop, where we sell coasters, keychains, trays, and more, all made one of a kind from recycled paper from comics, manga, magazines, and more. These are books that have been damaged that essentially we take and we keep them out of landfills by using the paper and the art and things that have survived in there, taking that paper, and what we do is we use it transformatively through fair use in a new medium by adding it as part of a new piece of art, and then recycling the rest and keeping that out of the ground, out of oceans, and hopefully going back right where it came from into new materials. So discount code DJAY123 for 10% off your first purchase there. Have a fantastic day, and as always everyone, stay shui.